All right, you vinyl maniacs out there, you're going to want to sit down for this one, get a refill of your tea or your coffee or your soda, whatever, for today's discussion. As we continue to have some marvelous artists here on the Vinyl Guide. Look, as a music fan and a kid of the 80s and a failed bass player, I'm triply excited to welcome today to the show Billy Sheehan. How are you today, Billy?
I'm good. Failed bass player. Come on, you got to get back to it.
I know, you know what? I just have the passion. I have the love for it. I've never put in the time or the hard work, and which I imagine is clearly the difference between you and the field of bass players out there that haven't been able to do the same as you. How many hours a day do you practice?
Quite a bit. I can go for, if I'm on tour, I get up into the venue around noon, work for a couple of hours, and then get back to do sound check, and then I'm a few more hours before the show. So, and then I do a 2-hour show. So it's quite a bit, actually. Good thing about bass, though, is it is the instrument that you can get by with very little.
Explain that.
It's just as difficult to excel on all instruments: harmonica, accordion, bass, French horn, whatever it is. It's difficult to become good at any of those instruments, certainly bass. But the good thing about bass is it's a great entry-level instrument because you can have very little knowledge at all and very little skill and still play a lot of what pop music is all about. So the good thing about that, I think, is the fact that it's a great gateway to becoming a musician, or just to enjoy your ability to play music. You don't necessarily have to be a virtuoso.
I could hold down the back end. I could hold it down. I could keep time. I can do the basics. But it's the level of bass playing that I see many players out there play. I just was never able to tap into that groove very effectively. When you're growing up and playing the bass, is there a point where you just reach kind of that whole new level where you're not only proficiently plugged in, but emotionally and spiritually connected as well?
Yeah, and that I think it comes a lot from performing live, because that's the real essence of music to me, is that live performance. I think that it's such an inspiration to do it. It drives you to go further, of course. So that might be a big factor in some players pushing themselves past their own limits. But again, I do believe that you really don't need to know a lot, and some great music. You don't have to be a virtuoso player to play well and enjoy, and have, more importantly, the audience enjoy.
When you look at the choices that the kids or young people have today versus the choices that you had when you were young, and I think I'm probably closer to your generation than the new generation, there seems to be many more options for them to spend their spare time with. Whereas back in the day, you used to carry a bass around with you. That was your thing. There were no phones, there were no games, that sort of thing. Do you think that's going to have any long-term effects on the quality of music?
Yeah, I do believe so. When I was young, it was music or sports, or maybe hunting or fishing, or a couple of other things could be your interests. But now it's kind of spread all over the map. That's nice to have all those options, of course, but it's a wonderful thing, and I don't believe in limiting or inhibiting that. But I think because there are so many choices, it's hard to pick one and stick with it for a long time. So you really need to, I believe, have that kind of passion built into you really strongly, and hit it hard. It takes a lot of self-discipline. A lot of people do it with a lot of different things, whether it's gymnastics, or the things you start when you're young, gymnastics, computers and gaming and stuff like that. The only problem with all that is there's no end to it. You're entertaining yourself, and that's enjoyable and fun, but you're not really entertaining anyone else other than the people who you're spending the people who own the companies you spend your money at, and they're entertaining themselves wildly, believe me. But the ability to entertain others and to communicate to others with your craft is really a great thing that I think a lot of people seem to be missing out on, sadly. And who knows, it may turn around, or there may be something else new that's happening that I'm completely unaware of that will that will dwarf what I knew as a youth as being something important and good.
I can't help but think that in the future the quality of music may decline simply because the numbers aren't there. When I was in high school, there were probably 50 guitar players, three of which that were probably really good and had a chance at a career for it and had the dedication to follow through. I look at my son's school; there may be 2 or 3 kids that play guitar, and the numbers start to go down.
That's very true, but it's an interesting thing that happens about the numbers. They said when desktop publishing started, there'll be such a flood of incredible novels that none of us will be able to keep up with all the amazing writing that people are doing. And it turns out about the same amount of great books got written every year prior to that. Same with home studios. I said, well, people will be putting out a brand new album every week. There'll be so much amazing music. We won't know what to do with it. And there's still the same amount of good records come out a year, in spite of the fact that there are a huge amount of people with home studios and home recording. If you have a laptop, you have a studio. It's as good or better than most that we've had in the past. So it's interesting. I'm not sure if those numbers will always translate to one thing or the other. Maybe less guitarists, but also any musician now has some incredible assets at his fingertips. I could never look close at Hendrix to see what his fingering was when he was playing. Now it's on YouTube all over the place at any time, anywhere, anyhow. And I can see not only Hendrix, but Van Halen or Eric Clapton or anybody close up and personal. And then get somebody analyzing it for me, showing me exactly the finger positions and what pickups they used and what amp it was. And so there's it balances itself out. There are less players, but the
resources are greater.
Yeah, exactly. Much greater assets and resources. And I do believe I see around Los Angeles here, kids starting at high schools carrying guitar cases more than ever.
Oh, that's promising.
Yeah.
Good. All right, so let's go back to the beginning here. What was it like for young Billy growing up in Buffalo, New York?
It was the greatest time in the music business that there was. Every neighborhood had a band. As you walk down the street on a summer night, you could hear a band in a basement or a living room or an attic. And as they faded out behind you, as you kept walking, another band would come in on the next block. You would literally see drum sets set up in people's houses as you drove down the street. It was an explosion of music. The Beatles hit Ed Sullivan. The British invasion happened. The world went crazy for music and bands. And everybody had to play. Everybody had to be a singer, drummer, bass player, guitar player, keyboard player, or whatever else. You had to do it. And everybody was involved. It was and everybody was into one kind of music or the other. It was interesting schisms occurred between the Rolling Stones fans and the Beatles fans, the Yardbirds fans and the Kinks fans, and just for fun, really. But it was amazing to see how important that was to so many people that they could get agitated if they were challenged by some other band that they didn't quite deem within their comfort zone there. But it was an amazing time. And then that translated to live performance everywhere. I was in Buffalo, New York, and within 100 miles, there must have been well over 200 clubs to play in. And within about 20 miles, there was clubs that had bands every night of the week, 3 and 4 sets a night, 15 or 20 of them. And our bands could live and make a living with no record deal, no original music even, just playing in cover bands and make a living that way. You had your own truck and PA and sound and lights and crew guys and everything paid for. It was a lucrative, wonderful way to get up on stage in front of people. Then eventually, of course, you snuck in an original tune, and then 2, and then 4, then 50-50, then 75-25, and then you were off and running trying to do a record. And that was the formula that just about every band there was, some varying degrees of variation on that formula. It was pretty much the same thing we all did.
And so I would imagine that's the same trajectory that Talas followed?
Yeah. We were a copy band. We became popular because we could copy songs really well. and we were good at choosing the right songs. That was a hidden talent that we happened to, by some means, accidentally fall upon.
Do you mind sharing that formula with us?
Well, we just listen to a record and figure what sounds like the single. And as anybody knows, in the radio business or the record business, the ability to do that will make or break your career in radio or records. And we got pretty lucky. We would listen to a record and know right away, I think this is the song that, because we were fans, we're huge fans. I'm still a huge fan of so much music. So when I listen, I can kind of tell the songs that work, the songs that I think people are going to go for, because I go for them as a fan. They speak to me. So I figure, well, if they're making it for me, I can imagine the audience in general at whoever's club we play on Tuesday night. I think they'll dig this too.
So Talas follows that formula, being first a cover band, then sneaking in a few originals. Eventually, you kind of tweaked with the ratio to where Talas was playing almost all originals around the clubs. Yeah. There was the first record, the first Talas record, which was on Even Fall Records. Who was Even Fall Records?
That was a guy named Larry Swist started it, and out of Clarence, New York. And he had a studio there, and he was quite a good local engineer. And he produced our first record for, I think they pressed 10,000 copies and sold them out.
Wow. And sold them through the shows, through the local record shops?
It was, we didn't sell any at the shows at the time. Retail grabbed it up because, again, different than it is now. They knew they were going to sell them out. So they took the full shipment, all the local record stores around Western New York, and they snapped up in no time, and we sold the thing out. We didn't make any money on it, but we sold it out. It was funny because people would see, let's see, 10,000 records at $10.99 a pop. Well, that's, they do them that way. Hold on a second. The $10.99 ain't going in our pocket. So right. I don't think we ever saw money from that, but that's okay. That's not uncommon. That's the way it goes. It's you do that you prime the pump with that. That's how it begins.
And primed the pump was because I think after that you had a deal with Relativity for the next record. Is that right?
That's correct. We recorded a record in Toronto, Canada. One of the reasons we did that is because Canada has an rule with the airplay on Canadian radio that if certain elements of your record are Canadian, then you can get on the Canadian radio. If they're not, you have the same restrictions as any other non-Canadian act. But of course, they try to promote Canadian music in Canada. So we went to Toronto, had a gentleman. I forgot his name, but he was a producer. So I think studio producer were two of the factors. So by doing that, we got airplay in Canada where we wouldn't have. And of course, we're an American band, not the Grand Funk, the song, but in fact we were. We came back to America with a record. We had it. We owned it in America also, so we could do with it as we pleased. Got that out on Relativity Records. That went. Now, Relativity Records is a funny thing. I don't know how many records we ended up selling. Accounting was tough there. So I do think in the end we missed out on a lot of cash, but such is life.
That was the album Sink Your Teeth into that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And but that also, again, like you say, primed the pump. That really set the foundation. That album went everywhere, including my house in San Jose, California, back in the early 80s. People were passing the cassette around. You got to hear this band from Canada. I remember that.
Do you think we were Canadian?
Yeah. Well, that was kind of the rumor. I mean, this is pre-internet, so we had no idea. We just knew. Here's how I was introduced to Talas. You got to listen to this bass player of this Canadian band. He's like Eddie Van Halen on the bass.
Well, that's very kind of someone to say. I appreciate that.
I'm sure you've heard that. You've heard that hundreds of times.
We played a lot in Canada. As a matter of fact, Toronto was a big city for us because we branched out from Buffalo quite a bit, quite far. We had one of our guys that worked for us one time. He told him to take his car and our press kits and start driving. They went to Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Boston, Baltimore, went all over the place, found the hottest clubs in town, gave them our press kit, booked us there, and we started spreading around. And we did play quite a bit in Canada on Yonge Street. It's a famous place called the Gasworks. I keep trying to convince Canadians they should do a Gasworks festival because everybody played at the Gasworks. It was like the Whiskey A Go Go of Los Angeles. The Gasworks was the place. So it was quite a great scene there. There was about maybe 8 or 10 clubs in the Toronto area that were big and packed and always had live bands. But we were from Buffalo.
So the album Sink Your Teeth Into that started creating more of a national reputation for you, and you started touring around not just Canada but out to the West Coast, all around the U.S. at that point.
Yeah, actually, before the album came out, on with no record deal and only our little local record under our belts, we got in 1980 we got the Van Halen tour. Now we were connected with great management connections by luck of the lottery was our geography. The guy that happened to be in Buffalo as a local promoter was very close with the agency that booked Van Halen. And so he became, by default, because he was the biggest guy in the music business in Buffalo, he became our default manager. So his name was Harvey, and we had another guy named Brad in New York City who was his partner. So this woman named Barbara Skydell with Premier Entertainment, they booked The Who and Van Halen and everything. And since he was booking their acts in Buffalo, which was a big market at the time, all The Who and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and all these huge bands, he got a good connection with her. Talked her into sending a cassette of our music out to the Van Halens. Eddie heard it, and they hired us.
And how many dates did you work with them on?
30 or 40 shows we did with them, which was great. And that's how I got to know them. And then the connection started there that eventually led to me joining David Lee Roth later. But another interesting side note is that Harvey, our manager in Buffalo, he used to do a lot of entertainment in town, and he used to do the Friday night stoner movies at an old movie theater, the Century Theater, which he also had concerts at. But if there wasn't a band in town, he'd run a Rocky Horror Picture Show. And somebody got the bright idea, why don't we make our own movie? And so he hired camera, script writers, all kinds of people. They went into production and they did a movie. And of course it was, some slasher film. It didn't do well. But then they got the bright idea, why don't we license our movie territory by territory to Spain and France, Italy and Germany, and pick up the licensing fees, and we'll make our money back. And they did, and they made all kinds of money on it. Then the same office had an even brighter idea. Why don't we find great movies in Europe and license them back to America? And Harvey is Harvey Weinstein. And Brad, his partner in New York, is Brad Gray, presently the president of Paramount Films. So,
wow. So at that point, Talas had certainly local recognition, starting to get national recognition in Canada. Even you can even consider that international recognition. Touring with the likes of Van Halen, has a real solid album out on Relativity. Why didn't Talas grow larger than an underground band?
That's a great question. I think the answer, if you to sum it up in an easier to understand answer, it was just I was in a band with two guys that were blessed with incredible talent, but at the same time was a curse because they didn't really have to work that much harder. They could slough it off and go up there and be pretty darn good. Where myself, I never had any natural talent. I had to work my ass off. So I was at it all the time. And I kind of drove them crazy because I was like, come on, let's learn some songs. Let's write some new songs. Let's get together. Let's rehearse. Let's redo the stage. Let's get some new gear. I drove them out of their minds. They just wanted to get up and play, collect their money, and enjoy their lives. So they just didn't have that fire. So unfortunately, and we had every opportunity you could imagine. We did a private showcase for Clive Davis. With just Clive in a chair and two guys sitting on each side of him in a soundstage in New York City. We had John Kolodner on the side of the stage at the Van Halen shows, jumping up and down, telling everybody this is the best live band in America. We had every opportunity you could imagine rolled our way, but it just didn't happen. So I eventually that kind of petered out, and I changed the band up. Got some more hungry musicians in there, which was good, but it was still a struggle. And that's when and soon after that I got the call from Dave to come out to California and start a band with him. So I decided to do so.
So let's talk about that. The call comes in. Hey, Billy, it's David Lee Roth. Wow.
Look at all the people here tonight.
What was that? What was that like when you got the call?
It was like the heavens opened up and a hand of an angel came down, grabbed me by the throat, and brought me upstairs. It was great. He was wonderful to me, generous, and at the time he was the biggest rock star in the world. I had spoken to Eddie several times about possibly joining Van Halen. So when Dave and I said, there's only one band I'd ever leave Talas for, is if Van Halen asked me to join. And so when Dave called, I said, close enough, and I was gone. So I didn't know, but he was leaving Van Halen. And so he explained to me when I got out there, here's the story. Got to keep it confidential. I'm leaving the band. I want to start a new band. You and me will find a guitar player, find a drummer, and we'll go. And I said, I'm in. Let's do it. So I finished the Talas Yngwie tour, which I was on at the time. Talas opening for Yngwie. Got home for a day or two. They sent me my ticket, and I flew out. And that began. The original guitarist was supposed to be Steve Stevens, oddly enough.
Oh, Billy Idol's guitarist, yeah.
Who's a great player and an awesome player, but it didn't quite work out. So I told Dave, I know another Steve, and happened to be my label mate on Relativity with Talas. It was Steve Vai.
Ah, that's right, because he had the flexible LP at that point.
Yeah. We'd actually spoken about doing something together prior to that, but then when that came up, I recommended him to Dave and to Ted Templeman, and he was the perfect guy for the job.
So that's it. Just real quick, picking up on something you said a moment ago, Eddie and you had a conversation about potentially joining Van Halen. I'm assuming
Yes.
that this is around 1980, was that Women and Children First kind of era. So even back then, he was having doubts about Michael Anthony.
Well, as the years have gone by, that was what my first impression was. However, as the years go by, I became good friends with Michael, and he's a fantastic guy, a wonderful guy. And that's why I didn't bring it up for a long, long time, until just recent years I've ever even mentioned it. For years, people, hey, I heard you got asked to join Van Halen. I would deny it because I thought it was kind of a slight on Michael.
Disrespectful. Yeah, you don't want him to feel, yeah.
And I didn't want to disrespect Michael because he is a wonderful guy. So in the end, I think, in fact, just seeing how some of the business is carried on recently within the organization, I think they may have thought there may have been an ulterior motive, which was, we can hire this kid from Buffalo as a sideman and split everything 3 ways instead of splitting it 4 ways. And believe me, in Van Halen, a 3-way split is a huge amount of money. And because in the 25% that I would make if I was a full member is a gigantic amount of money. It's a huge amount of money. And if they would have said to me at the time, okay, we'll give you $800 a week and all the beer you can drink, I probably would have said yes. And that would have been much more money for them. So I believe that could have been a big factor in the motivation, because I think Michael's a great player, and he's Van Halen ain't Van Halen without him. As much as I wanted to be in that band, as a fan, I didn't want the band to change. As everybody's listening, if you're a fan of a band, it's always heartbreaking to see them change the lineup that you fell in love with, which is usually the original lineup. So it was a lot of conflict in that situation there. So I'm glad now to have come to the conclusion by the things I've observed recently that I don't think it was necessarily because Michael wasn't a good bass player or a great singer, which he is. It was I do believe they were looking to get somebody that could, be maybe a factor of some degree of entertainment on the stage along with them. That Michael was also, of course, but also they could probably pay as a sideman.
Okay. It is quite odd the way that the Van Halen camp is run in the last couple of decades.
Yeah, because they did eventually end up offering the same thing to Michael. They said they weren't going to keep him as a partner and they were going to make him a sideman. I think that's when he quit.
Ah, okay. So he got the Bill Ward treatment.
Yeah,
Interesting. Oh well, maybe one day we'll see all four up on stage. Hopefully, it won't take
I'd love that.
yeah.
I love all those guys, and I'm supremely thankful and grateful that I was ever near them. And I love that band. That band was a huge part of my life, and that I got to play with Dave was a miracle, and I'm supremely grateful.
Sure. Now, it seemed like when David went solo, he went out and he found the most outrageous, most renowned bass player, yourself. He found Steve Vai, which, again, as a musician back in the days, it's like, wow, okay, well, if there's one guy that can take Eddie's place, or in that sphere, play in that sphere, it's Steve Vai. He got Greg on drums. He seemed to be signaling to everyone that, okay, I used to be in Van Halen, now we've upped it up a notch. Is that kind of how you guys took it?
Well, I think there's some competitive spirit with Dave. He is an amazing man, and I don't think he was going to put a band together that couldn't crush the last band he was in his mind anyway. I don't look at it that way, nor did Steve or Greg. We just were just happy to be there. We did our best, but Steve is an awesome player. Greg is a monstrous player. I do my thing, and it seems to work. And we're young and hungry. This is our now. Steve had already had success with. He was in Frank Zappa, which is quite a pedigree to have. Greg had a lot of success. He was a session guy, played in a lot of gigs. I just finished touring with UFO in 1983. I did a European tour with them, and been all around the place with a lot of doing zillions of shows with Talas. So we were all in pretty good shape, but we were all young and hungry. And I think that has a lot to do with it. None of us had fancy homes or fancy cars or anything. We just wanted to play and go out on the road and do shows and meet girls and have a blast, and where, as once a band does that for 4 or 5 years, it starts to get tired and you get into a rut, and you're not quite as motivated as you were when you're young. So we were very motivated. So I think Dave was wise to get hungry, young, crazy guys like ourselves and put a band together in that manner. I think in the back of his mind, of course, he knew there were going to be comparisons, so he kept that in mind, got the best that he could find, not self-aggrandizing by being included in that bunch, but in his mind, it was the best he could find. So I'm glad he did.
You guys are like the trophy wives at the family reunion. So what was it like writing and recording Eat 'Em and Smile? Did that come together fairly quickly?
Very quickly, and it was a blast. We go to Dave's house in Pasadena, and down in the basement, where Van Halen. If you read the Van Halen Rising book by Greg Renoff, which I highly recommend to everyone, it's Showbiz 101. It's just I couldn't put it down. It was just, and having been close proximity to some of that, I could verify for the accuracy of it. And it doesn't get into any gossip or any nonsense like that either. It's a really straightforward book. So we're down in the basement where Van Halen had practiced, and there were like old 12-inch Marshall speakers laying around in a pile, and chunks of amps and things laying around. And I kept thinking, Dave, do you mind if I'll clean this up for you if you want? I'll take it off your hands.
I'm heading over to the dump. I'm just going to throw this in my truck.
I'll make sure this finds a home. But I didn't, of course. That would have been pretty tacky. But it was just amazing to see that stuff there. And one of the rooms was all the Van Halen wardrobe from all the videos and stuff. I remember I had to do a photo shoot one time. Dave let me pick a few things out. And I think I grabbed the vest that Alex wore in the 1984 video. And I did a couple photo shoots with that. So it was just that lineage, that heritage there that just wowed us. It was so great. So we're in the basement, and now out in the garage was a huge storehouse of beer left over from the US Festival, which was several years older. Pasadena is not a cool climate, so it was in the hot garage for a long time, so the beer was skunk, but we didn't care. And they bring in the 6-pack of skunk Budweiser, and we'd sit around in a circle and tell band stories and hanging stories and road stories, and then write some stuff and hang some more and write some more and hang some more. And we were just like a little gang. It was great. A lot of people left Van Halen and came to work for us. Most everybody. So they were all upstairs in the offices that were kind of put together at Dave's house, and it was an incredible time. It was I drove a Ford Pinto in Buffalo before I left, and it was you got the fake tire that they keep in the back in case you get a flat. You put it on until you get to the service station. I drove on the fake tire for about 2 years. I was so poor I couldn't afford an actual tire, so I got to L.A. My first night there was out with Dave, and there was paparazzi taking our photo. So I went from the Pinto to paparazzi in less than 24 hours.
I thought you were going to say Dave helped you change the tire. That would have been.
I got left behind in Buffalo, and my brother said he sold it to somebody where he worked. He says he always know where they parked it because there was always pieces of it laying in the parking lot.
So it was really night and day when you coming out from Buffalo to Los Angeles, and you moved out there, so you haven't been back for cold Buffalo winters since?
No, I kept my apartment in Buffalo for about 2 years, but I went back for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that was it. But then I finally gave it up, and I was already established in L.A.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I lost a lot of friends because it's hard to keep. There was no internet then. It's hard to keep touch with so many people, so I had to choose one or the other. And of course, L.A. won out on that contest. And I love L.A. The weather is just incredible, and Buffalo. And plus every time I went home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, I would end up shoveling snow anyway. So I got my fill of Buffalo winters.
You guys also did a Spanish version of "Eat 'Em and Smile," "Sonrisa Chevalier."
Yes.
How did that come about?
That was my idea. However, once it was my idea and I got laughed at, but once they figured out that it was a good idea, it suddenly became someone else's idea. I won't mention his name. It wasn't Dave, but it was another guy who was involved in the thing. But of course, it was his idea that we do that. But I remember flying home from New York City, recording the rest of the record, and reading in a magazine that some huge 40% of the population is under the age of 25 in South America and Mexico. So I thought, man, what a demographic. We should do the record in Spanish. And I knew Dave spoke some Spanish. He's pretty good with languages. So I said, why don't we do it? So Dave and I actually took the tracks minus the English vocals to another studio, and we both sang on that. I don't speak Spanish, but he showed me phonetically how I was supposed to pronounce what I was going to sing. So Dave and I sang the Spanish version. I don't know how well it did or not, but every time I go down there, I'm signing dozens of them. So
can you still sing in Spanish?
Vuelto loco el calor. That's going crazy from the hurt. Crazy from the. And tímido is shy boy.
Okay, so those are the lyrics that you had to do 40 and 50 times in the studio. Yeah, they're part of you now. Wrote.
Yeah. Plus, a couple of times I've done shy boy in a country that is Spanish speaking. I'll throw a couple tímidos in there. Hasta luivido, so we get it in there. But I'm still working on English as far as my language goes.
If you've got a guitar in your hands, can you immediately recall the David Lee Roth or the Talas songs? Like how good is your musical memory?
Pretty good. It's funny though, when you record a song and then even if you tour with it and it becomes part of your blood, the next tour you got to learn all new ones, so you kind of clear your RAM out. And it's not as easy to recall. Certainly most of it I do, but not everything. And sometimes there's a couple little lines in a few songs that I'd have to go back and kind of relearn. But that's common with almost everybody I know. Bands that have been together for decades go in to rehearse for a tour where they can do the same songs they did the last 3 tours. You still got to rehearse them all again because how did that thing go again? Or what was my singing part again? No. So I generally retain most of it, but to actually perform it, I'd need to brush up.
Because someone like, I think I read where Sammy Hagar knows like 1,500 songs, the lyrics to them. He could sing them off the top of his head and play them as well, which is incredible feat. So it's interesting to understand kind of different musicians, like the sort of information they hold in. Like Shy Boy or, To Be With You, I'm sure comes right away. You've played them a zillion times. Right.
Yeah, and also if I'm sitting around with a guitar and a couple people and a couple glasses of wine, because you don't necessarily jam and sing along on bass. You need chords to sing along, so I will pick up a 6-string. And I have gone for 4 to 6 hours straight of singing and playing. A 3 Dog Night, Grand Funk Railroad, the Who, the Buckinghams, the Kinks, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the Young Rascals. I know a zillion songs, and with the guitar on, I can usually conjure up several hours of sing-along entertainment.
You're like a tantric entertainer. What were the records when you were young that influenced you?
The first single I bought was 8 Miles High by the Byrds. And I remembered it was so hard to find the flip side, which was a song called Why, which I loved. But the versions they had out were all different. And it's interesting that your mind instantly, I know, we used to play Name That Tune with CD player. And you'd hit it, and some guys would. It's not only the sound and the musical composition, the lyrics, but it's also the sonic quality of it. My buddy, we put on Mellow Yellow by Donovan, and it starts out with and before he sings I'm Just Wild About Saffron, and my buddy got it on the second click. Mellow Yellow, Donovan. And that's kind of how that stuff ingrains. There's a book called This Is Your Brain on Music. And there's a way that your mind just kind of automatically knows the sound of something and can instantly grasp it. And it's very interesting that it happens that way.
Do you still have the records from your youth?
I have Having a Rave Up with the Yardbirds, the first Vanilla Fudge record, For Your Love by the Yardbirds, a bunch of Zappa records. I kept about, some of your audience might not be too happy with this, but I only kept about maybe 15 or 20 vinyl records that are very important to me. Everything else, just for convenience, because I'm on the road a lot and I love my music and I love my music collection. It's about 2 terabytes of iTunes. In the end, I did eventually rip everything, get digital versions or rip it into my hard drive so I can have it with me everywhere or put it on a server and access it everywhere. So I'm not as much as a vinyl aficionado as many of your audience goes. I apologize for that, but I am glad they're out there. That's for sure.
Well, look, you've hung on to 20 records, which is 20 more than a lot of people hung on to. I mean,
they were so important to me. And I remember on there's a couple Frank Zappa records where there would be a scratch or a hiss at a certain part. And I would know the hiss, where I'd hear it without that, and it would sound funny to me. You just get so ingrained. And myself and Steve Vai, from listening to those Zappa records over and over and over and over again in our youth, we could sit down and recite, between the two of us, probably 5 or 6 records from front to back. Recite every click and buzz and sound and noise and piece of music and dialogue by heart. I mean, that stuff was so important to me. It'll never go away.
What's the Zappa phase that is your favorite?
I got in real early. I got Absolutely Free and went back and bought Freak Out and got into those 2 records for quite a long time. And then when We're Only In It for the Money came out, all hell broke loose. And that was just obviously some of the greatest music that ever was or will be. And then Lumpy Gravy, and then Uncle Meat. And then Frank kind of exploded with a lot of records after that. What's the song with with Willie the Pimp on it and Peaches on Regalia?
Oh, Hot Rats.
Hot Rats. That was our high school theme record. And then when I got my first apartment live at the Fillmore, and Just Another Band from LA, we would cycle through those records. That was the only records we would play ever, all the time and constantly. It was hilarious.
I'll send you an interview I did with Arthur Barrow talking about We're Only In It for the Money, because he was on the re-recordings of it. And so we did a kind of a breakdown of We're Only In It for the Money. So if you like that album, you may like this episode. I'll send it over to you.
Yeah. My only problem with some of that stuff is, and I understand the spirit that Frank went after it, but I am locked into the sonic qualities of the original recordings. And I think that happens a lot. And remixes or re-recordings, as a fan, they don't work for me. If they do for you or for others, God bless you, that's fantastic. But it took me a long time to track down digital versions of some of the early Zappa records that weren't remixed. and all I'd have to hear is that sax part come in a little quieter than it did on the original, and this ain't it, this ain't it, this ain't it, man. I know it's not it. And fortunately, there's a network of fans, and a couple of them got me versions of the original. Then I think the family eventually put out a remaster. Remastering is fine. It's just a great EQ that you do, and dynamics processing, possibly a little bit of a record. So remastering is perfectly legitimate. But the remixing or re-recording, as a fan, it just threw me. It just wasn't the same. Yeah, and I just remember my point about listening to things and understanding them sonically. I brought it up by saying the first single I ever bought was by the Byrds. And the flip side, why? There was about 4 different recordings of it. And I go, this isn't it. This ain't it. This isn't the one. Sure enough, they put out a Byrds retrospective with the single versions of all their A and B sides. And there it was. I go, that's the one. I knew it. I knew I wasn't wrong. And one of the things that bothers me about that, one of my other greatest early records was Rolling Stones Got Live If You Want It. I loved Yardbirds, having a rave up with the Yardbirds, which had a lot of live stuff on it. One side 2 was all live, which is great. So I was kind of into that live thing. So when the Rolling Stones came out with Got Live If You Want It, genius. I love that record. It's so exciting. But there's some announcements and dialogue that are not the same. And it's not what was on my original version. And I must have purchased 10 versions of that record to try to find the original version where it opens up like I remember it did, but I have not found it yet.
It's really a funny thing how, and maybe the book you said how your brain processes music. I'd be fascinated to read that, because going back to We're Only in It for the Money, I actually grew up on the updated version of it.
Wow.
And that was my introduction to Zappa. Was
We're template then, same as the other one is mine, that is yours, and listening to the original probably throws you off.
Yeah, I've grown to appreciate it, but at the same point, it doesn't have that memory, that joy that was ingrained in me like the updated version was. So, I guess it's all the perspective of where you come from.
Yeah, this is your brain on music. I think he describes that there's a certain time period in your life, and the music you listen to in that time period is pretty much with you forever. Recently, I posted a thing on Facebook of an older gentleman who had Alzheimer's, who would just sit and do nothing all day, and they put the headphones on him, and he came alive explaining the music and the songs and who played them and who sang them. Did the same thing with my mother. Rest her soul, as she was on her deathbed, my sister, we're all kind of standing around, and my sister said, "You got your computer here?" And I go, "Yeah, because you can put some Frank Sinatra on." So I did. My mom came alive. She said, "Oh, yeah, I know. That's the one, and the band was so-and-so, and the band leader was this guy and that guy," and she knew it all came alive. So this is your brain on music. Very, very interesting take on why that is.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to check that out. So let's go back to the DLR band. You guys recorded Eat 'Em and Smile. You're starting to tour on Eat 'Em and Smile. Van Halen is also putting out 5150. What was the competition like, in the live arena?
Well, we didn't pay a lot of attention, but I remember when the 5150 came out, and we were all at Dave's house, and he brought it down to listen to it. And I know Dave pretty well, and I know when he's being sincere, when he's being, public relations. And he was being sincere. He said he's kind of disappointed. He expected more fireworks. And in their defense, Van Halen got smart and realized, what a hit record really is, and sure enough had them. So it was an interesting time to see Dave's reaction to that. And then on top of that, I don't think there was. Dave didn't say any shit on stage about the Van Halens. Unfortunately, the Van Halens did about him, and Sammy did about him. And the fact that I was even near that war, I'm very, very upset about it. Because I love those guys. And I love Sammy. The first Montrose record is one of my favorite records of all time. Unbelievable.
You and Steve are probably like kids in a divorce. Your mommy and daddy are fighting, and you're.
Yeah, to some degree, that's for sure. And but eventually, I did a rock and roll fantasy camp, and Sammy was there, and I got up and played Space Station Number 5 with him, and that was a moment. That was great. I love that record so much from Montrose. So that was pretty cool. I'm the only guy in the world that's ever played with every member of Van Halen.
Oh, when was Eddie?
I played with Eddie in Chicago. We performed, myself, Pat Torpey for Mr. Big, and Steve Lukather. Uh, we did a benefit show there. I went to the house and jammed with Ed and Alex at least once, maybe twice.
Mm-hmm.
Played a show with Michael Anthony for Ampeg. We did a show. We played together. The keyboard player from Uriah Heep worked for Ampeg, so we got up there and did Easy Living and Stealin' and a couple things. Gary Sharon, I did a Who tribute show with him. As I mentioned, I played with Sammy. Also did a benefit show with Sammy also. And then I never played with Wolf. I never played music with Wolfie, but coming home from the Chicago benefit show, I played with Eddie. Wolfie was with him, and Eddie was kind enough to allow me to fly with him in his private jet thingy there, which is pretty awesome. And so he wanted to get some sleep, so I took Wolfie aside and had some paper, and we did some word games and letter games and looking out the window games. And so I played with Wolfie. I didn't play music, but I played. So I'm the only guy who's ever played with every member of Van Halen.
I imagine the Van Halen private jet as these big black and red stripes across the side.
No, they didn't have a private jet. There just was one offered to Eddie because he had to stop in Park City, where at the time his wife Valerie was doing a movie. So we stopped there, said hello to her. I think he may have dropped Wolfie off with her, and then we flew on to Los Angeles together.
So after Eat 'Em and Smile, big success, the David Lee Roth Band starts to work on Skyscraper. What changed at that point?
Everything. Everything changed. It was just an attitude overview, and I believe it was the people surrounding Dave at the time just changed it from a fun, great hang and a great band and a gang of fun and coolness and creativity and performing to a business. And we got home at the last gig. We flew back to LAX, and there was a brand new Mercedes there with a ribbon around it for Dave. And we all got a T-shirt that said, "Just fucking do it." So we just thought, well, I don't deserve any Mercedes, but I just thought, you know, it was a little tacky, so what the heck. But we still love Dave. That's cool. We're good. Let's start the new record. But then it was different. It was stuff would be recorded individually. It wouldn't be all together in the studio. A lot of synth stuff and dance. And I think Dave made a shot, and he was smart to do so. If he would have succeeded, he would be the king of the universe to this day. But he saw the dance music coming over the horizon, how big it was going to be. And it was going to be huge. And so he thought, well, if we could just kind of skew the band a little bit more in that direction creatively, stylistically, and catch that wave, we're going to ride that all the way into the beach. Unfortunately, the rock people hate you if you have anything to do with dance, and the dance people hate you if you have anything to do with rock. So it didn't quite work out. If it would have been just genius and great. So the tone and style of the record was much different. The sonically, stylistically, it was not my thing at all. One song they decided to not use any bass at all on. Paradise is just all synth bass, ding 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 ding, done on a little sequencer, and I just, come on, bro, really, so that was the end of it for me, and they went on their merry way, and I went on mine. But again, I love Dave, and it was a sad time for me. I did not want to leave, but I knew it wasn't going to go any further than that.
So after you left the David Lee Roth Band, you had a few side projects, but then came the idea for Mr. Big. How did that come about?
Well, I got together with Ted Templeman from Warner Brothers, and he was very interested in whatever I was going to do. So that gave me a lot of confidence. And so he said, and here he comes again. It's Steve Stevens again. He goes, why don't you get together with Steve Stevens? I go, okay, I did. So I got together with Steve. He's a great player, really great writer, and a 10 times better guitar player than you think he is, and you probably already think he's awesome. He really is a great player. Unfortunately, it just didn't click, and timing, and I wanted to get going right away, and Steve thought he could take some time, and I thought, I got to play soon. And so we parted ways as friends, and I already knew Pat Torpey and Paul Gilbert in L.A., and I really wanted to get a singer. So Mike Varney's a famous guy who's put a lot of people together. He called me up one day. He said, "What do you think of this singer?" And he played this guy over the phone. I go, "That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's what I'm looking for." And that was Eric Martin. And he sang a lot. Steve Marriott, Paul Rogers, kind of bluesy, wailing voice. I said, that's what I'm talking about. So I got together with Eric, and by chance, he was associated with Herbie Herbert, one of the founding fathers of the music business, the founder of Journey. And so, sure enough, when I went up, I had a meeting with him as well. And he, "So you could manage this?" He goes, "Yeah, I'll manage it." I said, "Woohoo!" Thank goodness. So I got together with Pat and Paul and Eric. We started writing, and that was the beginning of Mr. Big.
And on your first album, very strong. Your second album, Lean Into It, you had a #1 hit. What was it like having the #1 song in the country?
It changes your life completely. It really does. I wish everyone could have a #1 hit someday. Unfortunately, there's just too many people to have that, and not enough hours on radio.
Give us an example of how it changed your life.
Well, we'd go onto an airplane and get to our seats, and the stewardess would notice we were in a band. "Oh, you guys are in a band?" I go, "Yeah. What's the name of the band?" "Oh, Mr. Big." I never. We don't know what that is. I go, "I'm the one who." "Oh, are you kidding? That's their song." "Oh," and then they put us right up in first class, and we, just take care of, move us to the front of the line. We'd go anywhere, and it was just pandemonium in Europe. I mean, kids at record stores by the thousands. We got coming into Singapore, one of our first times. Singapore is noted because their drug laws are very, very tough, and there's even a stamped on the form you fill out, your immigration form you fill out on the plane that you hand to the guy when you land. It stamps, "Warning, mandatory death sentence for drug traffickers." It says right on there. It still does to this day. Mandatory drug sentence. Now, we weren't druggers at all. But we thought, I also remember back in the UFO days, they wanted us to play in that area, but we would have had to cut our hair to do it. We said, "I'm not sure." So it's really tight. So sure enough, the plane pulls up to the gate, and instantly running, as the door opens, 4 customs and immigration guys came roaring right onto the plane. We didn't normally that, you get off the plane, you meet them later. They came roaring on the plane to find us because they wanted autographs.
Huh.
So I could have been carrying a bag of heroin with me, but walk right through it. No, I'm kidding. I don't do that. But so then we get inside, and we walk through customs and immigration. I didn't even check anything, and we're on the side of a wall. And we heard this noise, this roar coming. What's going on? Apparently, the local radio station announced what time our flight was landing, and there must have been 4,000 people at the airport, and it's us, a little skinny assistant manager, about 50 yards and a cab waiting. And we had to get through a throng of people that was unbelievable. So the police came and they lined up and they made a gauntlet, this is how we discovered the gauntlets never work. The first moment we stepped into it, the crowd pushed, the police fell over, pistols and billy clubs were bouncing on the floor, literally, and we somehow made it to get into those cabs. With very minor cuts and bruises.
Wow. So that it's a bit of Beatlemania there. And that, of course, happens to you guys really throughout Asia. Why is it that Mr. Big is so popular in the international markets?
Well, we were wise to develop all the markets outside of the U.S. A lot of bands that get comfortable in the U.S. just tour the U.S. If it goes soft there, they're out of luck. So we went to Europe, England, we went to South America, we went all over Asia too. We didn't. People think Japan and China, they're very, very far apart. Japan is far from Korea. I mean, it's physically, geographically close, but there's 2 completely different worlds, and they don't necessarily interact all the time. So we hit Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. I get more email to this day from Indonesia than anywhere in the world. We played in cities in Indonesia that no Western band ever played. So we just built a thing there that was just huge. And any band could have done it, but we had hit single. So we had that a foot in the door everywhere we went. So wherever we went, we knew it was going to be a huge crowd, and we're going to do sellout business, and that allowed us to come back again and again and again until we established ourselves all over the place. And then not just in Asia too, but in Europe as well. At one point there was like 5 Mr. Big copy bands in Italy that would go on just their big songs and play them in clubs, So we played all over Europe as well, and then that stuff seeps into the rest of the world. So I get email from Senegal and Bangladesh and Iraq and Iran and all over the place. Everywhere you could imagine, we get communications from. And that is really an incredible, wonderful thing.
That's amazing. So you've seen these different Mr. Big copy bands. Have you seen any of the fake Billy Sheehans that may try to dress like you and appear like you as well?
Dozens. God bless them. No, it's a great honor. I do my thing.
Of course. It's fine. It just must be not many people have that experience of people running around on other side of the planet trying to look and play like
up them. For Halloween. That's cool. It's sweet, and it's just wonderful. I'm so blessed and thankful all around the world. I got friends everywhere, and it's so great. That's really the payoff. I've never really been money motivated so much. I'm not a rich guy. I have a decent house. I pay my bills. I'm doing okay, but I can go to Okinawa, and there'll be people there that I know. So it's pretty cool.
And a few that look exactly like you.
Yeah, one is.
So real quick, we're going to go through a few listener questions. I posted on the Vinyl Guide Facebook page that you and I were going to have a talk, and asked listeners of the Vinyl Guide to contribute some questions that we could ask for you. And any other folks out there who want to take part in this, I generally post it at facebook.com/Vinyl Guide. Join the community, and maybe you can ask a question to a future interview. All right, this comes from John Sanders out of Melbourne, Australia. Billy, were you there when Paul Gilbert punched Eric Martin in the face, and how hard did you laugh?
I don't think it was a direct closed fist punch, though it may have been. I don't recall exactly that. But there's a certain, when you're in a band together on a tour bus and you've been together through hell and high water, and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of tension, and these things can happen. Yeah, I was there. And Paul settled down, because Paul is the most peaceful. I don't think he's ever thrown a punch in his life. I think that was the first and last punch he ever threw in his life. But Paul is a wonderful guy. We're all good friends now. But it gets heated. It gets heated. I'm the only guy in the band that did not hit Eric. The only guy who's ever played with every member of Van Halen, and the only guy that was in Mr. Big who did not hit Eric. Both Pat and Paul did, and Richie Kotzen did too. But I never did hit him.
Well, you've got some shows coming up, so maybe you can fix that.
Yeah, there's always hey, the future looks bright. No, I'm kidding.
All right. Let's see. Ronnie in Florida. Billy, talk about there was a David Lee Roth reunion, or almost a David Lee Roth reunion in a bowling alley?
Yeah.
What was the story?
There's a jam in Buffalo at the Lucky Strike Lounge, which is also a bowling alley. There's a jam there every week. And the rule of the jam is no pedal boards, no nothing. You just go up, plug in, and play. And then you get off, next band goes in. And so it started to build, and it was becoming quite a thing. And all kinds of bands were there, too. I was in the backstage area. In the background, I hear, "Tom has come today." I go out there. It was the Chambers Brothers. They were playing. It was amazing. So very cool. So sure enough, Greg and I were going to do it. And it turns out Steve was in town. So, hey, want to come up and do Shy Boy? I guess we could. He goes, we could get Ralph from Steel Panther to sing it. And I forgot who said it, but maybe we should call Dave and let him know. Yeah. So a call got put in, and about 5 days before it went down, sure enough, Dave calls back. He's going to do it. What? Unbelievable. So that was the plan. And Steve and I had our guitars on. Greg was at the drums. Brett Tuggle, our keyboard player for Eden Smile and Skyscraper, he was at the keyboards. Dave was off stage with the mic, and the curtain was down. And Steve was ready to wah-wah at the beginning of Yankee Rose. We're going to do Yankee Rose and Shy Boy. No rehearsal, no pedal boards, no nothing. Just go up and do it like men. And off to my right, I saw a commotion. It was the L.A. Fire Department coming because they had the club screwed up. Legally it holds 600. They let them get away with 750. Once in a while, there was about 1,200 people in there. You could not move. If something would have happened, somebody would have died. So in a way, they did the right thing. It was just crazy. And then there was a line that went out the front of the building, down Vine is Hollywood and Vine, and curved around down Hollywood Boulevard. Another 3,000 people outside. So it was pure insanity. So the good thing about the whole evening was the fact that we got to hang out. So Dave, myself, Steve, Greg, Brett, we all went in the back room, one of the offices. We hung just like old days. And
Drank skunk beer.
we should have asked, you got any old cans of beer? I don't want any of this new, fresh stuff, you know. So, but we had a great time. I took a photo. I posted a photo on Facebook with there's about 1 billion comments on there too. And who knows? If the time is right, it's up to Dave. If he ever decides to do it, I'm ready to go.
Cool. Well, hopefully, Billy, that's something we all see in the fairly near future. Always enjoyed listening to the work you've done and the projects you've been involved in. And really, it's been an amazing conversation. Thanks for sharing. One last question. If it's your last hour on Earth, what album do you put on?
AC/DC Back in Black.
Any reason why? Other than it just kicks ass?
It is just one of the greatest records ever. And it is just lifts me up. I love that record. So actually, I probably should do Highway to Hell because that's a little bit more appropriate if it was the last hour of my time. But no, I love that record. It would be a tough choice, though. There's a lot of records that I could go out on. But off the top of my head, I'd take that one.
All right, Billy, thanks so much. It's been an amazing conversation. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being honest and, revealing. And I think we learned a lot of really cool stuff here, especially those of us who grew up in the 80s. You, alongside many of our other heroes. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining us here on the Vinyl Guide today.
My pleasure.